Designing and configuring virtual private networks. If you've been in the networking world for any length of time, chances are you've made a few connections using a virtual private network. It's one of the technologies that came out in the 90s that really revolutionized how we connect our networks together. In this nugget, we're going to look at how VPNs are deployed using the ISA server. The first thing that we're going to talk about is VPN fundamentals. What sort of connections you can make with a VPN and how ISA server allows you to deploy it. Chances are you'll see a few new things, even if you are pretty experienced with VPNs, in the way ISA server handles it. The second thing that we'll talk about is how to set up and configure VPNs using the ISA server. Thankfully, they make it extremely easy to set up using the ISA server wizard-based process. So let's start off with the foundation. What is a VPN? Well, the best description is that it is an extension of a private network. See, when you have two or more people trying to connect their networks together, they have two options. The first one is to buy a lease line. Let's say we have an office sitting in Nebraska. I'll put an N there. And we've got an office sitting in Arizona. I'll put an AZ. We can purchase a lease line between those two locations. Now, the benefit of using a lease line is it is your line. It's your bandwidth. You can go ahead and dictate exactly how the traffic is controlled over that connection. The drawback of a lease line is the big dollar sign. It does cost quite a bit of money. The second way that you can connect two networks together is going to be through a VPN. We can now have the internet cloud sitting in the middle. We'll have the Arizona and Nebraska location again, and we'll actually tunnel our information through the public internet. Now the nice thing is these don't have to be two full-blown networks. This could be a small little client machine, a laptop in Nebraska connecting to a major server in Arizona. So we're extending our private network that's in Arizona, I'll go ahead and draw a little land back here, across the public network of the internet. In order to do that, we need to make sure we're providing secure communication. And with VPNs, we typically do. We use a protocol such as L2TP over IPsec down here, or the point-to-point tunneling protocol that stands for the Layer 2 tunneling protocol. This is the point-to-point tunneling protocol. And either one of these will provide that secure communication that we need, because every single piece of data that we send across that tunnel will be encrypted. Now, the major difference, I should say, between L2TP and PPTP is the encryption algorithms that they use. PPTP has its own proprietary encryption algorithm. L2TP, which is the more recent one, uses IPsec, which is an industry standard and a very secure way to provide encryption. Microsoft and Cisco actually teamed up to make L2TP, and it's the preferred protocol. However, some of your older clients and legacy clients like Windows 95 might not support L2TP, which requires you to fall back on PPTP. There are two major ways that you can use VPN technology. The first of those allows remote users, individual clients, to connect through the internet to the corporate office, which looks familiarly like a chocolate chip cookie bar. Using this type of VPN gives you quite a few advantages. Let me show you the alternative. The corporate office might have, instead of using VPNs, they could set up a bank of modems and pretty much be their own service provider, allowing the remote users, instead of using VPNs, to dial directly into that office. Using this approach has a couple disadvantages. First of all, setting up a bank of modems and being your own service provider is pretty expensive to do. Second off is the long distance charges. The remote users either have to pay long distance dialing into that office if they're in a remote location, or the corporate office has to provide a 1-800 number that the remote users use. Either way, long distance toll charges are being assessed. Using a VPN eliminates both of those problems. The remote user only has to have a local internet service provider connection, and most people have that anyhow. They connect to their local ISP and initiate a VPN tunnel going across the internet, which terminates at the corporate office ISP. It comes through and reaches the ISA server sitting here at the corporate office. This allows many remote users to dial in to their local ISPs and connect through the internet. You don't have any physical equipment limitations because all these connections are logical through the internet. The second major way that we can use VPN technology is to tie multiple offices together that have full-blown private networks of their own. This is really neat in my opinion. Watch this. Imagine the corporate office had 300 users, and each of the branch offices had 20 users apiece. We could use VPN technologies to make it look as if the end result is one large network of 340 users. Without VPNs, we would have to buy lease lines or dedicated connections between each one of these offices to tie them together. That could get really pricey. Instead, all we need to do is purchase high-speed internet connections for each location. Maybe at the branch offices we even use technologies like DSL and cable. It doesn't matter as long as you have the high speed behind it. That'll allow you to tie all of these together. We could even establish VPNs between the two branch offices to give a full mesh feel to this, and everybody's connected to everybody. In my opinion, this technology will eventually completely do away with private lease lines between locations. Now, it'll probably take a few years, and my theory goes with the full-blown deployment of IP version 6, this will end up happening because everything is encrypted using IP version 6. This allows you to have a full-blown private network using the internet as your backbone. So with that in mind, let's look at how ISA Server makes it incredibly easy to set this up. But before we do, there's one more thing I have to do. Oh, come on. You know you were thinking it looking at those branch offices. Because there are two different types of VPN connections, I'm going to divide up the configuration section into the two major pieces. I'll show you first off how to set up the ISA server to accept incoming remote client connections, the client to office setup. The second part is I'll show you how to configure ISA server to connect to other ISA servers in a local remote configuration. You can also set this style of configuration up to have an ISA server connect to multiple remote offices. I'll show you how to completely deploy that because it's a little more complex than setting up the simple client to office connections. Now just so you know, ISA server does rely on the Windows 2000 or 2003 routing and remote access console to do this. So a lot of the settings after you set up the initial configuration will be deployed from there. And we'll get into that once we deploy this. You're going to laugh when you see how easy it is to set up ISA server to accept incoming client VPN connections. I'm going to expand this server right here. And then you see this network configuration down here? You can expand it. You'll never see VPN settings. You have to right-click on network configuration. This is where you get all the VPN settings. And right now we're going to allow VPN client connections. It comes up and says, welcome to the Virtual Private Network Wizard. Hit next. You're done. You have successfully configured ISA server, VPN server. The secret is, as I mentioned before, that all of the configuration happens in the Windows 2000 routing and remote access console and service. So to see what exactly happens when we hit finish, you'll see it start the service and so on. You can hit details, and it does mention that the number of ports available are 128, but you can actually change that from the routing and remote access console. So you can actually set this up to accept more or less connections from the clients than that. When we hit finish, what it's doing in the background is it's going to start the routing and remote access service. It says, do you want to start it? Hit yes, and then it'll start. While that's starting, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and we'll go into the routing and remote access and tweak the settings in a moment. Okay, the RRAS service has been started and configured to support the VPN connections for ISA server. I'm going to minimize this ISA management console and open up from the administrative tools the routing and remote access management console. When this pops open, I want to show you something. I'm going to expand this ISA server, and you remember back to the ISA management when we set it up for the VPN clients, it said 128 connections, right? Well, look at this. I'll click on ports, and if we see here, there's only 5 0 through 4 PPTP and only 5 L2TP connections. The reason why is the ISA Management Console makes the change directly to the registry. And unfortunately, you have to reboot the server for all of those ports to show up, all 128. So I'll tell you what, I'll go ahead and close this console. I'll reboot the server and I'll pause the recording because that can take a while. When it comes back online, I'll show you what that routing remote access console looks like. Okay, I've rebooted the server and I'm going to open the routing and remote access management console. It's going to pop open and we should see now, oh sure enough we do, that we have 128 ports of each type. So a reboot is necessary to have those ports show up in the routing and remote access console because it's a direct registry change. Now this is a lot of ports to have in here, and each port that you add to this list can consume just a small amount of resources. So if you're not using this many ports, I would definitely recommend coming in here, hitting the properties, right-clicking on ports, hitting properties, and going in and reducing that number. You can just double-click it and set the maximum ports that you have right here, and you can either increase or reduce that number of ports. Now, all of your administration for the VPNs are going to be done right here. Once it's set up in the ISA Management Console, all of the administration of VPN configuration will occur from the Routing and Remote Access Console because ISA server is a firewall and caching server, not a VPN server. It really works with Windows to make this happen. What it does do by setting up the VPN through the ISA Management Console is it opens the correct ports in the firewall so that you can accept those VPN connections. That's all you really need to do to set up ISA server to accept incoming client-to-office connections, remote users dialing in or connecting into via a VPN the central ISA server. Now the office-to-office, or more specifically gateway-to-gateway configuration takes a little more work. And the reason why is there's a little more security that needs to be involved in this kind of configuration. Why? Well, it's a permanent VPN connection. It's always going to be online between these two offices. Now when you set this up in ISA server, you're going to have a local side of the VPN and a remote side of the VPN. Overall, the local side is typically the central office. This is going to be the side that receives incoming VPN connections. Now, does that mean the local side can never dial out? No, but overall, it's the main site that is meant to receive them. The remote side is going to be your branch offices or your SOHO users, the small office, home office users that connect via a VPN to the central site. These are going to be the ones that constantly dial out. Now, I keep using this word dial. The reason I say that and the reason it's kind of stuck in my head is because when you configure a VPN, Windows 2000 and 2003 sets it up as a demand dial routing interface. That means when it needs to be brought up, it will connect across the internet via a VPN. It's not really dialing. It's making a new connection. It's bringing up a new network connection through a VPN. Now, again, I want to highlight that you can set up two-way VPNs to where the local side can dial or connect to the remote, and the remote side can dial back to the local. The best way to understand this is to really take a look at it and watch this configuration. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to set up this scenario, and we're going to have two offices. We'll have Arizona running an ISA server connected to the internet, and we'll configure a remote side in California. In California, we'll have a local area network of their own, and we'll go ahead and go all out. We'll set up two-way calling between these two so both sides can call each other. But for now, I want you to remember that Arizona will be our local and California will be our remote. So you ready? Let's go. I'll take you to the interface now. Now when configuring these VPN connections, you always have to start with the local side. You'll see why in just a moment. I'm on the Arizona ISA server, and I'm going to maximize this ISA Management Console. Now inside you see my ISA server, and I'm going to expand it down, and we have the network configuration. Just like before when we set up the VPN client connections, we need to go here to set up our local and remote sites. Now Arizona is the central site. It's going to be the local one. So I'll click on Set Up the Local. Brings up a nice little wizard, and I'll hit Next. First thing it's going to say is, give me a short name to describe the local network. Well, a nice descriptive short name is Arizona. We are the local network. And the remote network that we're going to be connecting to is California. So I type that in, and it says the VPN connection will be identified by this name, Arizona_California. Works for me. I'll hit Next, and it comes up and says, what protocol would you like to use when connecting between these two? Do you want to use L2TP over IPsec? That's the preferred way if both sides supports it. PPTP, or use L2TP over IPsec if that's available, otherwise fail over to PPTP. Well, I know both sides are running ISA Server 2000, so I know both sides can support L2TP over IPsec. So I'll hit Next. Now it's going to ask me, do you want both the local and remote ISA VPN computers to be able to initiate communication? If you do not check this checkbox, only the remote side will be able to initiate the connection. Then both sides can communicate. If you do check it, you will enable two-way communication, where Arizona can dial California and vice versa. So it's going to say, type in the fully qualified domain name or IP address of the remote VPN computer. Well, you know what? California just came online, so let's hop on over there and check out its configuration. Here I am on the California ISA server. I've changed the desktop background to gray so you can tell when I'm on what server. And I'm going to go ahead and open a command prompt. Oh, you also notice that it's running Windows 2000 instead of Windows 2003. But the command I need works exactly the same, ipconfig. I need to find out this server's public address, and there it is. I'm going to write that down, 130.13.112.88. The reason why is the local side, Arizona, needs this to connect. I also want you to see that in California, I have the private address range 10.1.1.x. Anything that starts with 10.1.1 is going to be in California. We'll need that information on the other side as well. There's one more command I need to type in, one more piece of information that I need. That is the name of the server. In this case, it's 2000 server. I'll write that right below that IP address because the local side will need both pieces of information. Okay, let's jump back on over to Arizona and finish our config. Back on the Arizona server, we now have the information we need to complete this wizard. First thing is the fully qualified domain name or IP address of the remote VPN computer. We wrote that down. It was 130.13.112.88. It also needs the remote VPN computer name or domain name if it's a domain controller. Well, we got the computer name of that 2000 server, and it's not a domain controller. It's going to be used for authentication when you're connecting through that VPN. I'll hit Next. From there, it's going to say, what is the range of IP addresses on the remote VPN network side? Now, we wrote that down as well. It was on that internal network. In California, we had 10.1.1.0 all the way up to 10.1.1.255. I'll click OK and add that. The reason we need this is so the ISA server in Arizona knows when to connect to California. For example, maybe you have a client in Arizona saying, I have some data to send to 10.1.1.50. The Arizona ISA server will go, oh, that's California. Well, boom, and instantly bring up the VPN connection to California to transfer that information. So that's why we have that range. I'll hit Next, and now it's going to say, what is the IP address of your local server? This is the IP address that the remote ISA will connect to. Well, this is okay. This is our public address in Arizona. And it's also asking for what ranges of IP address we have behind ourselves here in Arizona. Well, this is what our LAT looks like, and I know for a fact that we don't have all these addresses behind here. This is just the auto-generated LAT that we use during the installation. The 10 network especially, that one's sitting in California. We'll remove that. We don't have 169.254. We don't have 172.16. And we do have one of the 192.168 networks. It's 192.168.1. But let's get that specific. Let's add that one in there. 192.168.1.0 all the way up to 1.255. The reason I do that is maybe down the road we have other locations that may want to use some other slices of the 192.168 range, just to be safe. I'll hit next. And now it's going to say, what is the name of the file that you want to generate? Okay, this file is going to be what we use to configure the California side. So we've completely set up Arizona at the end of this wizard, but now in California, we won't have to do a thing. All we need to do is import the file that we're going to save to our desktop. I'll go ahead and name it, that'll make it easier, AZ California. Save it to the desktop, and that contains all the configuration that we need to set up the California side. One thing of note, though, be careful with this file. It does have all your VPN configuration, and if it were to fall into the wrong hands, they could import this into an ISA server of their own and then be able to connect to your server in Arizona through the VPN. Yikes. So to increase the security a little bit, Microsoft has included a little password protection for this file that the remote side needs to type in as well. So definitely type in a password here. I'll go ahead and use Homer, except I'll type H0M3R. Make it alphanumeric. H0M3R. I'll hit next, and it comes to the final details screen where we can summarize all of it. Oh, one thing I do want you to know, the ISA VPN set up the routing and remote access demand dial interface. It uses that demand dial interface to connect to California. And it added all the necessary packet filters. And we can view some help if we want to do that. But for now, I'm going to hit Finish, and it's going to go ahead and set up the rest of the ISA VPN for me. I'll go ahead and pause the recording while it's doing that in the background. Okay, the wizard is finished running. And before we get over to the California side, there's a few things that I want to show you. First off, let's open this routing and remote access console and expand the ISA server. What we're going to see under here is that there's a new network interface that it created during that wizard. Look at this. It's a demand dialed interface. Of course, right now it's disconnected. We haven't brought up the other side of the connection. But overall, this interface is going to be used to connect to California. It's emulating that VPN connection. I also want to expand this IP routing and hit the static routes. In the static routes, it has generated one for California. It's saying, to get to California, this is going to be the destination that you end up using. And you use that interface, the Arizona California demand dial interface, to reach that 10.1.1 network. Okay. I'll minimize both these windows, and we see the Arizona California VPC file sitting here on my desktop. This is the configuration file that I just saved. I'm going to copy that to something that I can take over to the California side, and it just so happens that I have on me a USB pocket hard drive. You know those little keychains and Pressure Friends one? I highly recommend getting one of those. It's very cool. I'm going to copy this California configuration file to there, and it is now stored on my USB device. So I can pop out my little keychain, walk over to California, and configure that remote side. Matter of fact, let's do that right now. I've taken a quick flight back down to California, and I'm going to open the ISA Management Console. Down here, I'm going to right-click on the network configuration and hit Set up a remote ISA VPN server instead of a local one. You'll see how much easier this is. It's going to ask me one question. It's going to say, where is your .vpc file? Because that has all the configuration I'm going to need. I'll hit Browse, and it's sitting on my removable USB keychain drive, that USB removable disk. I'll double-click the AZ California VPC. The password is H0M3R. I'll hit Next, and it says that's it. You're completing it. It's going to set up the routing and remote access demand dial interface. It's going to set up all the necessary IP packet filters because all the configuration California needs is in that one configuration file. I'll hit Finish, and all the magic is going to happen in the background, and it's set up right there. We are completely set up to work between Arizona and California ISA servers and communicate across the VPN. Wouldn't it just be horrible if I went to the summary screen right now? It'd be like me telling you, hey, I've got a great batch of chocolate chip cookies in the oven, and leaving it at that and walking away without ever letting you see them or actually taste them. So you know what? Let's prove that this works. Let's show you how this VPN is going to connect. Before I jump back over to the Arizona side, I want to show you California's configuration. If you notice that we have now created, because of that policy that we imported, the California-Arizona demand dial interface. If I scroll down, we'll see that we also created a static route from California to Arizona on 192.168.0.0. So let's test it. I'm going to hop back over to Arizona and ping this side. But before I do, I want to make sure that you see this IP address. In California, I'll do an IP config. We have the IP address of, on our internal interface, 10.1.1.1. Now you'll notice that we have some PPP RAS servers that are being created, these dial-in interfaces that are popping up on the way. I'll show you that when we get to the Arizona side. For now, let's hop over there. I'm back on the Arizona side, and I'm going to click on the Start menu, hit Run, and open a command prompt. I'm just going to do a simple command, ping 10.1.1.1, enter. Sure enough, we are pinging across to California's private IP address. I'll do an IP config just to prove that we are on the Arizona server and we don't have any 10.x interface in our listing up here. What we do have is our internal connection. There's our internal IP address right here. We have the PPP adapter RAS server dial-in interface. This is a virtual interface that it created in the routing and remote access to allow dial-in connections. Here's the external connection. This is our real IP address that's on the internet that California is connected to. And then down here we have a second PPP adapter interface that this one really uses for internal communication on its own network. PPP creates these. We don't even need to worry about them. But I do not have any 10.x interface. Let me show you the routing and remote access beauty that we have in Arizona. I say beauty because it is a beautiful thing. Arizona, California, the interface is demand dial enabled and the connection is connected. It has been brought up. We're communicating with California. Now in the routing and remote access console, I can right click on this interface and do a few things. I can boot myself off. I'll disconnect it, and if I hit F5 and hit refresh, you'll see in just a moment that it will go down eventually. Now we can also set some filters on this interface. I can say I want to filter this interface so only certain traffic can bring this up. As of right now, all traffic is able to bring this interface up, so I could hit New and specify that maybe only this source address, or maybe this destination address is the only one that can bring it up, or maybe this certain protocol can bring it up, and I can specify any port number that I want to for any protocol. Be careful though. This is not an add deny filter. This does not filter all traffic. This is a demand dial filter. You ever seen the movie Wayne's World? When they're going to Alice Cooper in concert and they see him, and what do? They fall down and they go, "We're not worthy. We're not worthy." What you do here is you're setting up your worthy traffic. This is traffic that is worthy to bring up the connection. Here's the catch. Once the connection has been brought up, all traffic can cross the link. It's just the worthy traffic that can bring up the link. The non-worthy traffic won't be able to bring it up, but this is not access control in any way. Let me close this and show you one other thing. I'll right-click on this and show you that we can also set our dial-out hours. If we only want to be able to call California between certain times, we can select those times and specify them just like we do in the ISA server in the schedules field. So however you want to do that, it is totally up to you. But one of the key things to remember is once you set up the VPN in the administrative console, it's all administered through this routing and remote access. ISA server works with Windows 2000 and 2003 to set this up and administer it from this location. Now I can bring up the summary screen because I've shown you the chocolate chip cookies. In this nugget, we have seen the VPN fundamentals. What is a VPN and how does ISA server support it? The second thing we did was spend a lot of time in the configuration, both for the client connections and for the gateway-to-gateway connections, configuring both the local and remote side. And you would have to set those up for every single gateway-to-gateway connection that you want. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.